Sanchez, and today we are going to be making a strawberry pie. The first step is the pie crust. And I make my own pie crust. Not everybody does, but I'm going to show you how to make your own. So the first step is to get your flour out. I personally use unbleached flour, but whatever you want to use is fine. You take 1 cup of unbleached flour. Here's your dry measurement, and you use a butter knife. And you just make sure that if there's any air pockets, you're just making sure the flour gets into those air pockets. And as close to 1 cup measure as you can get, just level it right off with the knife. You will need the flour because you're going to need it when you're rolling out the flour for the pie crust. I'm so sorry. You're gonna save your flour to the side because you're going to need it when you use your rolling pin later on. The next thing that you need is ½ teaspoon of salt. You just get your ½ teaspoon measurement. Same type of thing as you do for the flour is you just make sure it's all leveled off. You don't want it to be a heap. You also don't want it to be less than ½ teaspoon. You want as close to ½ teaspoon as you can get. And you just pour it in there. You will not need your salt again. The next step is your Crisco. This is a vegan recipe, by the way, for those of you who are vegan. You need a 1/3 cup, and you're just going to take your Crisco and smush it into the 1/3 cup measure. You want it as level as you can. And that's good enough. You will not need your shortening again. I do want to mention that you are going to want to preheat your oven before you start doing this. So your oven should be at 475. You mix your flour and your salt. If you want to sift it, you're more than welcome to. I'm lazy and so I don't sift it. I don't think it makes a big difference. Now I'm putting the 1/3 cup of shortening that we just measured, and I'm just putting it into the flour. Okay? You're going to need to cut the shortening into the flour and salt mixture. So I use this, however, you could also use 2 butter knives, and you could literally just 2 knives. But instead, purchase these other contraptions, and it will make your life a whole lot easier. But if you don't have one, just use 2 butter knives until the Crisco and the flour have been cut into itty bitty pieces. This does take time, it does take some elbow grease, and it's just worth it at the end because I much prefer a homemade crust to the ones you buy at the store. But if you want to just buy one at the store, you can do that too. Whatever you want is fine. Just wanted to show you how I do it. So that's pretty good. We don't have to be perfect. We just need the pieces to be pretty much not big pieces of Crisco in there, but mixed up together. The next step is that we are going to use 2 tablespoons of ice water. Now, what I usually do is before I preheat the oven, I put a little teacup in the fridge and I put it in there with a couple ice cubes. That way I have my ice water because you do want your water to be cold for your pie crust. So then I just take my tablespoon measure and I just need to put about 2 tablespoons of water. Then you can mix it up. Okay. The rest of my mixing is going to take place on, I use a cutting board, but you can usually, if you want to just put it on your countertop. If you want to just put it on your countertop, that's fine too. I personally use a cutting board. And then I take the flour that I saved previously and I just sprinkle the flour on my cutting board. Okay, sprinkle and then spread it out. You also are going to need a rolling pin for your pie crust. And on the rolling pin, you're gonna wanna put flour as well. Yes, you're gonna use a lot of flour. That's to keep it from sticking. You don't want your pie crust to stick to your countertop or to your cutting board, however you decide to do it. So you take your pie crust that you have prepared and have it ready, and you're gonna knead it a couple times. Now, you see how it's just a pile of basically crumbs? You're going to just smush it together at first so that it's all together. And the way you knead is I usually just use my knuckles. Put it in a little bit. just do this a couple times. Or a few times, really. That's to get the pie all stuck together. After it's pretty good, you can get a feel for it once it's all mushed together pretty much. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's why I named my channel Flavor Over Flair. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to taste good. Try to do your best to just do what you can. We're not all best at everything we do. We just try our best, and that's what matters. You take your rolling pin. You're gonna want it to be a circle, obviously, because pie pans are circular. Try to get your pie crust to be as circular as possible. Feel free to add as much flour as you want to your rolling pin because you just don't want that pie crust to stick to your rolling pin. Now I know this is not big enough, but what you can do when you're not sure, you know, how much more you have to roll out, you take your pie pan and you basically measure it by looking on top. Okay, so I see I still probably have to do about an inch or so on all the sides. I obviously need more flour on this part of the pie because it just picked up with the rolling pin. So I'm just gonna add a tiny bit more flour. And that should be good. All right, I'm gonna check to see how much more I need to roll out. So I'm taking my pie pan, I'm looking it over. All right, I'm looking it over and I think it's probably pretty good. I'm gonna roll it out just a little bit longer because I do have some spots that need a little bit more. For the most part, it's pretty good. I'm gonna call it quits. I'm gonna say that that's good enough, that it's rolled out well. And so the way that you put it into your pie plate, take your cutting board, or if you're just using your counter, you're gonna have to fold it over. Again, I usually just use a cutting board because it's easier, the flimsy ones. You take it, you fold it in half, and then you put it in the pie plate. If it breaks, it's fine. We'll just fix it. So I probably could have kept rolling my pie crust a little bit longer, but I am not a perfectionist. So to me, it's good enough. If you are a perfectionist, then you're gonna wanna keep going. Now I'm just taking it and I'm smushing the edges because I do wanna make it look a little bit cute on top. So I'm gonna take the extra pieces and put it where it's a little bit thinner if possible. There are some pie recipes, pie crust recipes, that are slightly larger. I just am using the smaller version. So what I'm gonna do now is with the little bit that's hanging over the edges, I'm going to take my knuckle and my 2 fingers and just make little notches all around the pie crust. Okay, that didn't work. Don't use that part of the video. Okay, so that's it. Your pie crust is ready to put in the oven, and it needs to go in the oven at 475 degrees for about 10 minutes. It may not be the most beautiful pie crust in the world, but I promise it's good. It tastes good, and once you put your strawberry filling in there, it's even better. So the next step after you have placed your pie crust in the oven is we are going to wash and hull our strawberries. Now, because of the pandemic, I've been using white vinegar to wash all of my produce. So I'm using white vinegar mixed with some water, just washing it that way. Typically I would just rinse it with water. So we have come to the part where we are going to wash and hull our strawberries. For me, it's easier when you use a strawberry huller, which when I got it came with this colander, which makes it easier when you're washing. So I'm just gonna throw in a bunch of strawberries. I have a 2-pound container here, but I'm most definitely not going to use the whole thing. Typically I will just use 1 pound. I'm going to take my white vinegar, pour it in there, along with some water. And I have left it in another bowl, that way the white vinegar can actually do the job. So for now I'm just gonna let them sit in here just for a little bit. I'm gonna mix them around and then I'm gonna take the tops off. I'm gonna take my strawberry huller, take off the top, and just, if there are any bad spots, water and vinegar. I am going to go ahead and spill that out. And I'm gonna rinse them off with just water, just in case there's any taste of vinegar still on the strawberries. So the next step in this process is we are going to cut them. Typically I will just cut a regular sized strawberry into quarters, but you could also cut, the larger ones into 6 pieces. The next step is to take 1 cup of the berries that you just chopped up, and you are going to stick it in a pan on the top of the stove with 2/3 cup of water. You're going to take your liquid measurement, and you've got your 2/3 cup water. Just make sure it's right there at the lines with the eye test, make sure it's level. And then you need your 1 cup of strawberries. And I'm going to use just a regular dry measurement. And this does not have to be perfect. And for this part, you're going to simmer this together for 3 minutes. Now, what simmer basically means is you have to make sure that the water and the strawberries get a little hot. You might see a couple of bubbles come up first. You don't want it to boil, but you want it to simmer, and it probably might end up boiling, but the bottom line is it has to be hot before you start putting the timer for 3 minutes. You don't have to continuously stir though. You can just leave it there and then come back and stir it here and there. While we're letting that sit, I'm going to go ahead and prepare what goes into this afterwards. So as we are waiting for the strawberries and water mixture on the stove, we are going to work on the mixture that goes inside of that. So the first step is we are going to put 1 cup of sugar. So I have my sugar. And again, we are going to take a dry measuring cup. And unfortunately my handle broke, but still works, still does the job. And just make sure it's 1 cup. You don't want it to be overflowing, you don't want it to be empty either. So I typically just use a butter knife. Okay, so we have our 1 cup of sugar. And the next thing we need is 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. So I have my tablespoon measure. I always use a sifter whenever I use cornstarch, just because I don't trust that it's not gonna make huge globs in my whatever I'm making. I don't like the globs of cornstarch. So I'm going to take the tablespoon measure, and again I'm gonna use my knife, and I'm just gonna level off the excess cornstarch because I just want 3 tablespoons. Now that that's sifted, just gonna mix this together. This part is ready to go onto the mixture on the stove when the 3 minutes have passed. So at this point, we are just waiting for the water and strawberry mixture to simmer. Once it starts simmering, we will put the timer for 3 minutes. I don't know if you can tell in the video, however, the water has started to turn a little pinkish, reddish. I'm going to, and since there are a few bubbles coming up here and there, I'm going to go ahead and have the timer started. Okay, so 3 minutes have passed, and the mixture that we have prepared previously, we are going to put it into that pan. Once it starts boiling, we're gonna leave it boiling for a minute. We have to continuously mix it because we don't want it to get stuck and burn. Remember, we also have the 1/3 cup of water that we prepared previously. Again, we're just gonna pour it into there. And I am going to go ahead and raise the fire to be like medium high, so hopefully get it to boil quicker. So I have removed this from the hot spot on the stove, and as you can tell, it is quite different than it was when it first got in there. Now we're going to place most of the remaining strawberries into this mixture. We are going to leave about 1/2 cup to a cup of strawberries that we're going to just place on top of the pie. So I'm just going to take about less than a cup, put it to the side, And the rest of the berries I will put into this mixture and mix it all up. Okay, now I'm gonna take this mixture and I'm going to pour it into my pie crust. Now I will tell you, when you see my pie crust, this is probably the worst pie crust I've ever done. Name of my channel, Flavor Over Flair. Again, I don't care how it looks, I care how it tastes. Probably because I'm a little nervous because it's my first video, so we'll let it slide. But I'm gonna get my pie crust. I'm gonna take what we just did and just pour it into the pie crust. Okay. And all the leftover strawberries you can just place on top. And now this is going to go in the fridge. You could leave it in the fridge for a couple hours or 3 hours, and then you can eat it. So we'll show you. I usually put whipped cream on top.